Hey there, time travelers. Ready for another nostalgia trip back to the past? Hop in, because in today's video, we're traveling back to a time when people shouted, Yaba Daba Doo! And if your name was Wilma, people called for you very loudly. It feels like forever since our TV screens were dominated by a whole slew of Hanna-Barbera cartoons, and I have to say, I miss eating Cocoa Pebbles while I watched the show that inspired the cereal. The Flintstones was just one among many cartoon families that felt as if they were a part of my own with how much I watched them when I was a child. The best part about the Hanna-Barbera cartoon universe was when their shows would do crossover episodes, and one of the best had to have been when the Jetsons met the Flintstones. Not only was it a very fun special, but it also brought about a ton of fan theories that indicate the two shows are a lot more connected than we initially believed. Today, we're going to be discussing a secret connection between the Jetsons and the Flintstones. Now, if you've ever watched the Flintstones, or even simply know the characters from the cereal boxes, there's a good chance that you assume that the Flintstones are a family of cave people, and you'd be 100% correct. But what you might not realize is that, at least according to multiple fan theories, the Flintstones don't actually live in the Stone Age. Instead, the theories suggest that the show takes place in a post-apocalyptic future, with the world being left to start over following a massive nuclear fallout. From that point, there are multiple theories that branch off from this point to tell the story of both the Flintstones and the Jetsons, all of which came from what I still maintain as one of the most ambitious TV specials to come out, especially in the 80s. In 1987, Hanna-Barbera cartoons made fans unbelievably happy when they were able to tune in and watch two of their favorite families interacting with one another. The Jetsons Meet the Flintstones was a 2-hour TV special in which the Jetsons used a time machine that was built by Elroy to go on vacation. Only instead of going about 500 years into the future as they had planned, a mishap saw them traveling back through time where they ended up in the Stone Age, where they met the Flintstones. It was honestly a well thought out special that had a lot of moving parts in it. I mean, it opens up with the Jetsons, and as usual, George was having issues with his boss, Mr. Spacely, who thought that George had been spying on him for his competition. Meanwhile, back in the Stone Age, the Flintstones were busy trying to figure out where they should take their family vacation. Only as Barney and Fred were planning their trip, they were interrupted by their boss, Mr. Slade, who explained to them that they can't go because they need to work late for him and help him get his company's production up to par with the competition. Fred and Barney disobeyed him, of course, and ended up losing all of their money at a poker tournament where they ended up facing up against their boss, who wasn't supposed to know they were there. Once he found out, he fired Fred and Barney, leaving them with no money to go on their vacation to Honolulu. In the Jetsons timeline, their family was also getting ready to take a trip to the future in Elroy's time machine, when a mishap actually sent them traveling to the past. Once they ended up in the Stone Age, the Jetsons quickly met the Flintstones and the two families got acquainted. Throughout the rest of the special, we got to see Fred messing around with George Jetson's gadgets, which he actually used to help Mr. Slate to beat the competition in the company picnic. There's even a point in the 2-hour special when Mr. Spacely, George's boss, attempts to use a time machine retriever to bring his family back from the Stone Age so that Jetson can help him with his business. Only instead of bringing George back, Mr. Spacely accidentally brought the Flintstones. With the Flintstones stuck in the Jetsons timeline and the Jetsons stuck in the Flintstones, the rest of the special showed the families attempting to assimilate into each other's lifestyles while they were each being used by each other's bosses. Mr. Slate was using George to beat his competition, Mr. Tarpet and Mr. Spacely was using Fred to gain some much-needed press for his company. At the end of the day, though, everything ended up working out, and eventually, the Jetsons were able to return to their timeline where George was able to get his job back from Mr. Spacely, and a similar situation happened with the Flintstones, who were given George's partnership that he had acquired as a part of Mr. Slate's company. The Jetsons Meet the Flintstones is still one of the most ambitious and well-thought-out TV crossovers to this date. I mean, it had everything from robot romance to robot betrayal. It even showed cavemen experiencing corporate greed firsthand, in space. Most kids watching TV back in 1987 would have never believed this crossover was possible, but it ended up blowing its audience away and paved the way for many more Hanna-Barbera crossovers in the future. And on top of that, it got a lot of fans thinking about all of the possible connections that there might be between the Jetsons and the Flintstones that had been previously overlooked. Interestingly enough, almost all of these theories start the same way. Most humans, especially the wealthy, fled the Earth to begin their lives in space during a time of imminent nuclear war that was sure to put an end to all, if not most of the life on Earth. During this time, those with the means to escape did everything they could to ensure that they made a life for themselves in the sky. This meant designing sustainable floating homes and vehicles that could travel through space to get the inhabitants from one place to another safely. Eventually, this was all smoothed out, and in what seemed like no time at all, most of humanity had managed to set up a sustainable future for themselves among the stars. In the future, this is where families like the Jetsons and other characters from that show would end up living. Meanwhile, back on Earth, there were still quite a few families that were unable to evacuate and essentially left to pick up the rubble that was left behind in what would have, by that point, been a nuclear wasteland. Most of them likely would not have survived the fallout, but those that did would have been left with almost nothing. No electricity, no plumbing, and the world as they knew it would no longer exist. From that point on, every aspect of humanity's survival on Earth would have been different, especially with most of the animal species likely being wiped out and those that weren't most likely mutated. Over the years, and possibly even centuries that passed, it's believed that dinosaurs would return to walk the Earth, almost as if the nuclear war was a giant reset button. And just like that, a second Stone Age would begin. Eventually, the characters we grew to know and love as the Flintstones would be born. And at that point, at least to them, everything would seem normal. Much like the families in space, the Flintstones would eventually get into routines and be capable of going about their business and lives as if everything was as it should be. And I know that the idea of nuclear war being the end of the world sort of seems like an overdone trope, but think about when these shows came out. Both of the shows first aired in the 1960s, with the Flintstones coming first in September of 1960 and the Jetsons airing 2 years later in September of 62. This was during the height of the Cold War, and nuclear tension was at an all-time high. Almost every day was lived in semi-fear that at any time all-out war could break out, which inspired a lot of writers at that time to write about dystopian and apocalyptic futures that came in all different forms. So I could absolutely see the creators over at Hanna-Barbera Studios setting up a universe that had been in the process of rebuilding itself after a nuclear war practically decimated the Earth, and giving it to us from two perspectives was genius. We got to see life on Earth through the Flintstones and life in space through the Jetsons. On top of that, there is some evidence that the Flintstones, while being set in a Stone Age, was not set in the Stone Age. Throughout its runtime on television, there were a few episodes of the Flintstones that were Christmas themed, and they even referred to the holiday as Christmas, with the family celebrating it in a very similar way to how it's celebrated today, only Flintstoneized. Now, if you know your history, the Stone Age occurred a very long time before the concept of Christmas, which, as you know, was originally intended to be the celebration of the birth of Christ, another event that occurred long after the Stone Age. As we said, though, that's basically where all of the theories stopped being identical. And following the events of the nuclear war that sent most of humanity into space and left some on Earth, there are a few possible options for exactly how the Flintstones and the Jetsons line up timeline-wise. As you might know, if you're a fan of the Jetsons, the show canonically takes place in the year 2062, which is why, for their vacation, Elroy wanted the family to use his time machine to travel to the future, to the 25th century. While a lot of people figured that the time machine malfunctioned, or that Astro accidentally set the time machine to travel to the past instead of the future, one fan theory suggests that they did actually go forward in time to the 25th century. According to the theory, the Flintstones weren't around until the 25th century, which would have been hundreds of years after the nuclear war. This would have provided enough time for either the radiation levels on the Earth to dial themselves down, or possibly even evolve whatever life was left on the planet so that they would be able to survive under such intense radiation levels. The most common school of thought, though, is that over time that radiation levels died down, and eventually a handful of humans that had been living in space were tasked with repopulating the Earth and making it capable of sustaining human life again. Once they arrived back on Earth, they quickly had to learn to adapt to life with dinosaurs, and without any of the electricity or futuristic amenities that they might have gotten used to while in the sky. And eventually, over time, the Flintstones came into the picture, and the shenanigans that we all loved to watch on TV growing up could begin. Another theory that follows the post-apocalypse theory suggests that the time machine did in fact malfunction, only instead of sending them back or forward through time, it simply teleported them to the Earth. That's right, it's believed by some fans that the Flintstones and the Jetsons actually take place at the same time in their universe. According to the theory, the time machine malfunctioned and simply teleported them to the destination that they had chosen and not the time they had chosen to go there. But because life on Earth had become so primitive and there was no sign of technological advancements, the Jetsons and us watching the show simply assumed that the Flintstones lived in prehistoric times. In this theory, it's sad because all of that life that was left on Earth was poor and less well off. And odds are, most of the wealthier people who managed to get into space, begin their lives among the stars, likely assumed that all of the unwealthy people that had been left behind were dead and gone. Unbeknownst to them, the families were learning to live and almost thrive in the new Stone Age. Now, as much as I love these theories, it appears that they might not have much chance of being true or accurate. You see, there have been multiple occasions in both of the shows that suggest that they take place at very different times. For the Flintstones, there was a publicity photo that came out to commemorate the birth of Pebbles, where you can see a chart that is sitting on Wilma and Fred's bed. If you look closely, it claims that the year is 10,000 BC, and not present times or even the future. On top of that, in multiple early episodes of the Jetsons, we caught a few glimpses of the ground on Earth, and it's not like the Flintstones at all. That being said, I love these fan theories, particularly the one where the Jetsons actually did travel to the 25th century, but just didn't realize it because the surroundings were so primitive. What about you though? Do you think there's a chance that the Jetsons and the Flintstones were connected outside of the fact that they were both Hanna-Barbera cartoons? Be sure to let us know in the comments below. We love to hear from you all. That's all for today. Remember, if you enjoyed today's nostalgic conspiracy, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel to make sure you don't miss the chance to travel back through time.